Get back to the big story that developed overnight. We just told you some of the details on Air Canada teaming up with the feds, Canadian taxpayers getting a stake in Air Canada after the airline finally came to terms with the federal government on an aid package that will give it access to nearly $5.9 billion in government backing. In exchange, Air Canada making several commitments, including customer refunds for flights that never took off, protecting jobs, and continuing to provide service across the country. Robert Kokonis has been covering the ups and downs of the airline industry during the pandemic. He is a veteran industry consultant. The president of AirTrav joins us now. Robert, thanks for being with us. What was your reaction to this news overnight?
Well, it was holy cow, and not so much in terms of the amount of money, but the fact that the government of Canada is a shareholder in Air Canada again. Just for viewers to understand, it was 1988 when the government passed the Air Canada Public Participation Act, and here we are. I heard this rumor back in October that the government was potentially talking about some sort of public participation, but in equity. But to see this today was incredible.
You know, you're not the only industry voice that I heard from as I spoke to different people who was surprised by Air Canada ultimately agreeing to have the government as an investor in stock. You know, I do wonder, the government throughout this pandemic, the way by which they have structured aid packages, very much in the early innings of this pandemic, tried to focus on the average Canadian, you know, programs like the CERB program. If we were talking about industry aid, it was more blanket assistance, whether it was through loan programs or wage subsidies, which, by the way, airlines were able to take advantage of. And I think the reluctance for the government always on this idea of being considered a participant in a bailout were things like the auto loans during the financial crisis, and the perception that maybe the government was badly burned in that. And given the cash burn at Air Canada, I wonder if, when they looked at the situation, you know, if from the government side and Air Canada side, just it was sort of an inevitable place to end up.
I think you're right. Optics are everything on this file, and the public writ large, their collective memory, good or bad, about the auto sector bailouts. But you know, the airline industry was never talking per se about bailouts. What we got last night was low interest loans and Canada's LEAF program, the Large Employer Emergency Planning Facility. Part of the problem that there was such a low take up on that was the cost of capital was too high. So coming through with some low interest loans, you're right, when in your entry into this, the Air Canada and other carriers in our airports have been burning through cash, millions of dollars a day at a staggering pace. And arguably this year, that pace of burn has increased because travel restrictions in Canada, around the world, the rise of the variants of concern has done a real number on us. So I think they got to the point, the government, especially perhaps the trigger to push this forward over the finish line was when Air Canada pulled the plug on the Transat deal. And I think the government realized, and not just Air Canada, but there's going to be several carriers that really need some assistance to get us where we need to be.
I mentioned some industry participants suggested to me that they felt that having a deal with Air Canada, as opposed to coming out with an industry-wide aid package, is because not all airlines are created equal. They each have their own unique issues they're working through, their unique financial burdens, but also because, going back to that subject of perception, one wonders if you've got sort of an attempt at a one-size-fits-all strategy, that it might be perceived as favoring one airline over another, and the government, I would imagine, doesn't want to seen as being favoring one airline over another.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a hyper-competitive industry globally and within Canada. Every airline's got a different capital structure, how they finance their aircraft, for example, different scope of operations. A carrier that has a global reach like Air Canada and has some very different types of needs than perhaps a regional carrier in this country, or maybe Sunwing, which is focused on sun destination flying primarily. But I do expect that this will be the catalyst. We're going to see other deals announced, I believe, within the next 4 months. I think Transat in particular needs some sort of working capital stabilization. WestJet late last fall, started to refund customer money on a more of an accelerated basis, I believe, than Air Canada. So perhaps their type of capital needs is different than Air Canada. Suffice to say, all of our participants in the aviation and tourism food chain, we're dying, and especially when we've seen the likes of U.S. carriers now receiving their third targeted round, not like Q's, which was non-industry specific, and all that did was get people out of their homes that otherwise were not working, taking them off the EI rolls and giving them some money for a couple of months. It did nothing to address the severe cash drain on the airline sector. So again, given the fact that U.S. carriers have received 3 separate bailouts, I think the government understood, Minister Freeland and the Prime Minister understood that we were going to be put into a pretty tough competitive position versus U.S. carriers, versus some European and Asian carriers that have a leg up on the Canadian sector.